Welcome to Hustle and Flow with Heather Hubbard, episode number 30. Hi, I'm Heather Hubbard, and I was a litigator, partner, and practice group leader at an AmLaw 200 firm. I know what it takes to rise to the top. I also know all too well the toll it can take on your personal life. So how do you shine bright without burning out? How do you embrace your ambition without selling your soul? You're listening to the Hustle and Flow podcast. Hello and welcome back. I am your host, Heather Hubbard, and today's topic is a bit serious. I want to talk about Charlottesville, and I want to talk about race, and I want to talk about having uncomfortable conversations. So I am recording this on August 17th. I don't think it will come out for a few weeks. And I struggled with, should I even be recording on a topic that may no longer be timely? And then I realized how ludicrous that was because this topic is always timely. It doesn't really matter how close we are to, some bigger event that occurred. It is a timely topic always. And to the extent that this has died down in the news by the time that this comes out, then hopefully this will serve as a reminder that the conversation needs to keep going. So I was this weekend, I think I've shared with you, I've been working a ton. I'm growing, I'm scaling, and I don't quite have enough people in place. So I've been putting in a lot of hours. I had a friend that called me on my stuff. She saw me on the street and said, "You're working more than you did in your law firm." And so I decided to try my best to check out a little bit over the weekend. And I went to the pool one day, had a really hard time relaxing. The next day I went out on the lake with some friends and did a little bit better job. But I was disconnected. I wasn't really paying attention to my phone. I wasn't paying attention to the news, the internet, social media. And so when I checked in and saw on Saturday afternoon what was happening, I was outraged and just filled with emotion that this is still where we are. And then I was even more upset when I noticed that no one was saying anything on social media. Now, maybe they were like me and all on the lake and checked out, but I doubt that's the case. And one of my Black friends, she had posted something and she started her post with, "I know that people are not going to like this or comment, and they may even unfriend me, but..." And then she proceeded to simply say that what was happening in Charlottesville was outrageous. And I thought, well, I'm confused. Why would people defriend or not like just for saying, hey, racism isn't okay? Nazis and white supremacists, marching on Charlottesville's not okay. Like, how was that a problem? And that's when I realized that was some of my own white privilege coming into play. I don't understand the fear or the consequences that Black people in America feel when they stand up for what they believe is right when it comes to racism. When I speak out against it, people may not like it, but there's really no harm or consequences to me. For my friend, after she makes the comment, she may be judged differently because she is Black. So she wears that color of skin every single day. She can't then just hang up the conversation because she feels it and experiences it every single day. And even as someone that deeply cares about this issue, I can never truly know the pain or the consequences that are felt by those that live it every single day. And I thought, what kind of world are we living in that my friend cannot feel like she can say that without people getting mad at her? And then when I saw that no one else was saying anything, it really made me sad, but it made me really, really angry. And so that's when I then posted, and if you follow me on Facebook, you may have seen it, but I quoted Desmond Tutu, which said, if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. And I was confused as to why no one was speaking out. I mean, these are white supremacists. These are people that are admittedly Nazis, and they are marching with torches and chanting terrible things, and we can't condemn that and say, this is wrong? And because there were protesters on the other side, it somehow makes the argument more nuanced? Or that because there were people that wanted to protest the removal of a statue, and because they walked beside or with the white supremacists, that was okay? No, absolutely not. And, more and more people are starting to speak out and denounce what's going on. But, I keep reading how even business people and CEOs, some of them are not even saying things to their employees or making public statements for fear of consequences. And it's exactly because of that we need to be talking about this. If you fear consequences for speaking out against racism, then that is a major red flag. And that should tell all of us that we have so much work to do in this area. We are not even close to making the progress that should have been made by now. And I have to tell you, as a history major, I specialized in military history. This is exactly when people need to be speaking out. You can't wait until it's too late. And it just really burdens my heart that we see this as a political conversation, because this is not political. When people say, well, I don't like to get involved in politics, this is not political. Racism is not political. This isn't a matter of, are you a Democrat or are you a Republican? This isn't a matter of, did you vote for Donald Trump or not? This is about racism and whether or not you recognize that racism is wrong. And not just that you recognize it, but that you're willing to fight for and stand up for others that are being oppressed. It's really easy to be a white person, to say, I don't really want to offend anyone. I'm afraid of consequences. I'm just going to stay out of this. That's the very basis of white privilege. And my guess is that no one that's listening to the podcast is hearing this for the first time, or they're like, oh, that's an aha moment. But I do guarantee that I have Republicans listening to this podcast. I guarantee that I have people that live in small towns, rural America, that's listening to this podcast. I guarantee that I have people that voted for Donald Trump that listen to this podcast. And that's where I really want to take the conversation, because you actually can make a difference. I don't hide that I am a liberal Democrat. I don't hide that. But I can tell you what that means. It means that when I go back to my small town and I start, railing, no one listens to me because I'm too far gone. I'm not connected enough in that environment. And because I can be so polarizing, because I can be so divisive, they don't hear what I'm saying. And I don't hear what they're saying, right? I mean, that's where we are in this country. We're getting to this place where, you get on one side or the other side. And then you just kind of isolate. You're like, okay, well, I'm just going to hang out with my people. I'm going to hang out in my bubble so that this feels comfortable. Now, that said, I do want you to keep in mind, I have plenty of friends and clients that do not agree with me politically. And to me, that's not a big deal. But this is not about politics. This is not about politics. And so that's why I hope you can hear what I'm saying, because I think we probably are on the same page. And I think there's such an opportunity for you to be able to speak up and make a real difference. So I want to go back and share a little bit about my childhood. I have considered telling some of this before on the podcast. And, it's so weird to do this podcast because it's a bit of a confessional. Like, I'm talking to so many people. Over 1,000 of you listen every week, and I don't know your names. But I'm speaking into this microphone in a room by myself, and for whatever reason, it doesn't feel as scary. But what I'm going to tell you, I've not told. Some of this, I don't know that I've ever told anyone, because I have a lot of shame around it. And that probably means it needs to be said. I was going to do this podcast not this particular episode, obviously, but I was going to talk about some of these things a long time ago, and I kept losing sleep over it. And so I was like, okay, I can't do it. I can't do it. You shouldn't say that. But I thought about it yesterday and thought, I think I'm going to share it. And I slept like a baby, which means it's time. It's ready. And there may be consequences. I hope not. But fear is real. And if I'm asking people to move past the fear of saying something, to move past the fear of consequences, then I too need to own that and walk into my own fear and be courageous to tell the truth. So it's easy for me to tell you stories that I grew up in a racist, sexist town in Kentucky. But it's not easy for me to tell you how I used to have a part in that. I didn't feel comfortable. I knew things weren't quite right. But it doesn't mean that I was just born with so much wisdom that I in no way ever fell prey to that kind of thinking. And so it's easy for me as an adult and as someone that has a company that cares very much about social justice and equality to say that, I have always been on the right side of things. But that's not true, because that's not how life works. And I think for many of us that do see as adults that racism is not okay, we just start from that standpoint, right? Because what we don't want our Black friends to know is that maybe we were slightly racist. And when I say slightly, that's not even true. Maybe we were racist before too. We don't want to say that, but it's true. And by not saying it, we're actually minimizing what they have felt and experienced their entire lives. Because I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong, that every white person has that experience. And so when we claim that we've never been anything but for equality, we're actually minimizing the impact that racism has and the presence that it has. So when I was growing up in a small town in Kentucky, I think I probably had a different experience than most in that, so my mother, she grew up on a farm in a very religious Christian background, right? So it's probably what you might expect. She was middle income. My father, on the other hand, he was one of 9, and they grew up in the projects. Now, the projects in a small town in Kentucky looks a lot different than the projects in a really large city, but people still avoided the projects, right? And that was still where, that was the rough part of town. So it was also in the part of town where most of the Black people lived, and the schools were technically segregated, even when I was a child. Now, they weren't segregated in the sense that there were no white kids going to Black schools or Black kids going to white schools, but that was still the effect. So my father, he lived in what was called the inner city. Again, that's kind of funny because it's a small town in Kentucky, but still, it was considered the city. And so all of the city kids went to one school. Well, what that meant was that there were very few white kids in that school, but my father happened to be one of them. And then all of the other kids went to the other high school, which means that that's where all the white kids went, right? So, it was still segregation. And my dad, that's, how he grew up. And then he ended up becoming a teacher and then eventually the principal. And so when I was a young girl, my dad was a teacher at the city school and eventually was the principal of the city school. So when I would go spend, time at the school or, we would go to the football games, whatever, I was always in that environment. So I was exposed to a lot of Black people. And when I say exposed, that may sound really weird, but for most of the kids in my county, they actually were never around Black people, ever, right? And so that's part of why I say that. So it wasn't odd to me to often be the minority in a lot of situations. Eventually, they decided to merge the city and the county schools. I remember when that happened, I was pretty young. I think I might have been in the 2nd grade. Actually, that's not true. I think I was probably in the 4th or 5th grade. Anyway, I remember it being this big deal. And I remember because, we went to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. I remember there being a lot of conversations in the church about how wrong it was, how wrong it was that we were merging the schools, because we were going to be bringing violence and bad kids into the county system. And it was going to make our county kids, one, have to be around mean, violent people, and two, it would expose them to bad things. Okay, so even as a child, I recognized that it was weird that we were saying that by putting the black kids and the white kids together, that the black kids were going to be mean to, influence, or create, violence against the white kids. I didn't understand that because I've been around a lot of black kids and that was not my experience. I was confused by that. But guess what? I was listening to it because as a child, that's what we do. As Nelson Mandela said, we are not born to hate. We are taught that. And so even though I had this one experience, I also had another. And the other experience was that I commonly heard very racist things, and I heard them in my church. I grew up in a Southern Baptist church where we were supposed to be the good, the righteous. And yet that's where I heard most all of the racist comments. Those were the people that thought we should not be bringing the evil into the school. And the evil, that was the black kids. And this is what we want to overlook. This is what we don't want to talk about, because the people that were in my church, they were really good people, right? When we're talking about good people, they were really good people. I'm pretty sure that's who Donald Trump was referring to when he said there were good people walking with, the neo-Nazis. Well, let's define what that is, because, yeah, you're good in the sense that you go to church. Yeah, you're good in the sense that you've got a big heart and you help other people. You're good in the sense that when you're around other white folks, you are so nice and kind and loving and gentle and giving. And even in public, you might appear to be kind. But if you're holding that kind of hatred in your heart, you're not good people. And maybe you're good people, but you're still racist. And that's not okay. The good news is, just as hate is taught, so can love be. And sometimes I think we stick so much to our story, and we never want to admit that we're wrong, that we stick with it. And so for me, it's really about, how do you tell someone that has been racist their whole life that they don't have to be anymore? That no longer has to be part of their story. Well, for me, growing up, I heard those stories, right? And when I was in the 3rd grade, my first boyfriend was Jerome. And I thought Jerome was amazing. And of course, I was telling everybody about it. There was only one problem. Jerome was black. And I was told... Well, I'm not going to say what all I was told, because, people are still living that said this to me. And while they indeed are racist, and I will tell them that to their face, it's not really my job to drag them through the mud on a podcast. But I was more or less told that Jerome could be my friend, but I could not have Jerome as my boyfriend. Now, keep in mind, I'm in the 3rd grade. So the conversation that was had was a little weird. I didn't fully understand it. Looking back on it now, I'm like, what the? And here's the thing. I had to tell Jerome that. And you know what? I have learned that a lot of people have this experience. And it was odd for me to not be able to have the boyfriend that I wanted. And again, it's 3rd grade. How do you think that made Jerome feel? Because I was a kid and I was honest, right? Because I wasn't trying to be mean. I was just like, apparently we're not allowed to, you can't be my boyfriend. You can only be my friend. How do you think that made him feel? And I guarantee you that's not a rare experience. How, as a child, does it feel to be told that you're different, so different that you can't be seen in the same way? That you have to be rejected by the color of your skin? And that's where we're not having enough conversations, and we don't know enough about the experiences of our black brothers and sisters because we're not asking about their experiences. So fast forward, after the merger happened, they just had one school. So my dad lost his job and had to move to another place. And so he became the principal of, it's the same county, but a smaller town. It's considered the more rural part of town. So in a funny way, it's kind of the bigger city calling the smaller city redneck when they were all redneck, but whatever. But sure enough, it was culture shock for me. I go down there and there's no one that's black, no one. And the things that were coming out of their mouths, it was outrageous to me. I was outraged. But guess what? Over time, it became normal because what you hear and what you see around you that's repeated over and over becomes normalized. And so when I was in high school, and this is again something that I've never told anyone, so I'm just going to put it out there as fast as I can. When I was in high school, I had a shirt that had the Confederate flag on it. Like, I'm stumbling as I say this. I have so much shame around that. And to this day, I wonder if there's any kind of pictures out there and that's going to get posted. Here's the thing. My story is not unique. My story is not unique. I have no idea how I got that shirt. It certainly was not because I was trying to make any kind of, racist comment, but I had been normalized to believe that it just stood for being a rebel. It just stood for being a rebel. Now, I was a very intelligent person and I had history class. I understood the civil rights movement. I understood the Civil War. And yet I didn't think that was a big deal. I did not think that was a big deal. And I remember that, the rural county, like when we would have our basketball competitions, everybody would be in their trucks and they would have these big Confederate flags and they would drive up to the, big city of Richmond. And the people in Richmond would be like, that is so redneck. Like, what are you doing? And it was this concept of, yeah, but we're the underdogs. We're the rebels. Okay. Guys, I went along with that. I fully embraced and endorsed the fact that it just meant we're just being rebels. And I have so much shame and guilt around that because I now know that that is not what that means. That is not what that stands for. And that's quite frankly just stupid. It means so much more than that. And it doesn't even matter what your intentions are because the message that you're sending, that's what matters. So I get to the University of Louisville for college and I would just make little comments. Because again, even though I was an intelligent person, for whatever reason, I had come to believe that it just wasn't a big deal. I did not think I was racist. That's the other thing. I truly did not think I was racist. And that's the problem. That's the problem. It allows us to say, well, I'm not racist, but then you do very racist things. So I get to the University of Louisville, and thank God at the college level, people are not afraid of just speaking their minds because that's where I learned. That's where I was educated. When I would say something that was indeed racist, but I genuinely didn't know it, people would call me out on it. And because I was at least open and curious and did not want to be racist, I would say, tell me more. And so then I started picking up on things and learning about things. I was like, oh, wow. And then, someone said, think about that. The Confederate flag stood for slavery. So when you say you're a rebel, think about what that means. And again, I was a history major. I specialized in military history. And I was like, oh, wow. Yeah, that's really embarrassing. So I immediately went back to my hometown because I would go home, pretty frequently. And I would start calling out all of my friends and family. And at that time, I was still close enough that they valued what I had to say. And they too were like, oh. So when someone started telling a story, they would say, oh, yeah, she was black. I could say, wait a minute, what's the relevance? I'm sorry, is there any relevance as to the person's skin color to the story? Because if not, that's racist. That's racist. And no, it's not. Yeah, it is. Think about it. And so I was able to do lots of little things like that. Did I change everyone's minds and hearts? No. Did I educate them a bit? Yes. Now that I'm no longer close to it, right? You've heard I don't go home that much. I go home about once a year. Now when I go in, and by the way, the last time that someone was down here visiting, they said that, they were experiencing reverse discrimination in our hometown. And here's the thing. I no longer can be patient and educate. I got so mad that, I do become the crazy liberal, and I put my hand in their face and I'm like, I can't even talk to you right now because I was so angry. So that means when I try to then talk to them, they're not listening. Now, the person did come back to me later and say, okay, you've educated me on a lot of things before. Talk to me, educate me. And I was able to do that. But my point is, you have to be close enough for it to matter, right? Like once you get too far apart, you can't have those conversations and people listen to you because they automatically just assume that what you're saying is political and or not aligned with what they believe. So I know we're going long. This is such an important topic. Just if you live in a small town and you are a lawyer, I guarantee that you are well respected. And even if you don't see eye to eye with people, I bet you do on a lot of things. You wouldn't be living in that small town if you didn't love those people, if you didn't love living in that town. And again, I don't care what your politics are. If you truly believe in equality, if you agree that white supremacy is wrong, if you agree that Nazis marching in the streets is wrong, you got to speak up. I encourage you to start educating. Because they will listen to you. It doesn't mean you're going to change people overnight, but they will listen to you. You are respected. And I get that you may fear what people will think or say. But I often wondered when I was going through school, when I was learning about the civil rights movement, or I was learning about World War II, I always wondered, how would I have been in that situation? Would I have been on the right? Would I have spoken up? And would I have spoken up before it was too late? Would I have been marching there with them? And I always wanted to believe I would have. But, we're in a situation now where if you're not speaking up, you can definitely know that you would not have been doing those things. You would have been silent during the civil rights movement, and you would have been silent during World War II. So I think you just have to decide, whether or not you want to be a moral compass. And I think as lawyers, we do. I think lawyers have always been in society speaking out about what's right and what's wrong. And I get that a lot of people make lawyer jokes and don't like lawyers, but when you look at the Constitution, when you look at constitutional history and how we have ever made change in this country, it has been the judiciary, it has been the lawyers that have said, this is right, this is wrong. We are pillars in our society. It is our obligation. It is our responsibility. And maybe you're no longer in that small town. Or maybe you're in a big city. Maybe you're a Republican. Maybe you voted for Donald Trump. Maybe you still support Trump. I don't know. Your voice matters. I can tell you that after the election, I was really upset and distraught. And I posted on Facebook. I said, I don't know what other, Democrats or snowflakes need, but here's what I need from you, my friends. I need to know that when this administration starts to single out people based on hatred, that you have got their back. And they all liked it, and they all said, will do. I can tell you not a single one of them has said anything about Charlottesville. Not a single one of them has said anything about any of the hate-filled speech that has come out from that administration. And again, you may agree with the politics, but there is no way you agree with that hate-filled rhetoric. But when you're silent, it makes me think that actually you endorse it. And if you're silent, I'm going to go back to Desmond Tutu. If you're silent, you are on the side of oppression. And so it's time to find the courage. It's time to find the courage and speak up and say, this is not about politics, because it's not. This is about humans looking out for each other. And if you can't say that marching on the streets with torches as a white supremacist, chanting, or even walking beside them is wrong, like if you can't say that, then I think you really have to check in with who you are as a person. I also think that all of us that are white need to be telling our stories. And here's the deal. I get that, quite frankly, our stories don't matter. The stories that matter are the stories of Black people. But sometimes we're so divided, we can't hear that story. My hope is that by your being honest about the way that you were raised, about the racism that maybe you participated in, you can validate the experience that others have had. And you can say, you know what? I've changed. We all have the ability to change. Just as we learn to hate, we can learn to love. And it admits that racism is real. And it's not just real in neo-Nazi groups. It is real in every single white family in America. It's still there. It's still there. I've yet to go home and not heard something racist said. I used to let it go. It would make me mad, but I let it go. I don't anymore, which is part of why I'm now called the crazy liberal. Because I speak out against it. Because that's what's required of us. Again, this is not political. This is moral. If we're not willing to stand up for all human beings, then we can't really say that we're not racist or that we're trying to make the world a better place. And then, most importantly, I encourage you to listen. Because although I would like you to confess and get the shame out there and let the world know that you know what racism is real, and that even if you don't want to be racist, that you certainly probably grew up with some of it, I want you to listen and I want you to ask about experiences. If you do not know the atrocious experiences of Black people in America, then you're not letting others feel safe enough to tell you those experiences. I just want you to think about that. So if you have no friends of the other race, then I would start with trying to figure out why you don't have any friends and working on that. Assuming you have friends and colleagues that, you don't ever really talk about race, maybe have that conversation. And don't go in and say, what did you think of Charlottesville? Because they're probably not going to be honest if they don't know where you're coming from on that. But maybe you say, I'm struggling with what to tell my children. What are you telling yours? And you can say, I don't think I fully understand what it's like to be Black in America. Can you share some of your stories with me that would let me see how you have been discriminated against? And again, obviously it depends on the relationship. Use your judgment in the way you ask that question, because it could be really offensive if you ask it and you don't have a good relationship. Because, I won't go there. Anyway, use your judgment on this, but ask questions and listen. Listen, just listen. No buts. You can't listen and ask about, Black Lives Matter or anything like that and then say, but what about this? Or then try to, pose an opposing view, or to try to then have a discussion about, don't you think it's nuanced? Nope. Just listen. Just listen. So that's my challenge to you, is to be courageous enough, 1, to speak up and to speak out, and 2, to listen. To listen. I don't have all the answers, not even close. I don't even know if I'm doing this right. But I know that having a conversation is important. And I know the more that we're willing to have discussions, the more likely we are to actually make progress. And so I appreciate you listening to me today. I believe that we all have the ability to speak out. I believe that we all have the ability to listen. And so I hope you do so. And I would love to keep this conversation going over on the podcast page. So if you have thoughts, if you want to share anything, you can go to hustleandflowpodcast.com/30 and let's talk. All right. Have a great day. Be kind to one another, and I will see you next week. For show notes, downloads, and other free resources, and to keep the conversation going, head on over to hustleandflowpodcast.com. See you there.